why wouldn't you take this small expense and time of doing this to potentially save millions of dollars later? Hi, Jeff Mersaci, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to this video. We are going to be talking about the one word that can save the family millions if a surviving spouse takes the right steps. So this is where one of a married couple passes on, and then they go to the attorney, they go to the accountant, and maybe they're doing the right thing, maybe they're not. But we're going to run through 3 different scenarios to get to this one word that can save millions. So let's jump right into it. The situation that we're going to be talking about is John and Jane Doe. And in 2023, John Doe passes on, leaving his spouse Jane Doe and 3 adult children, Jim, Jennifer, and Jerry. So after collecting life insurance and reviewing assets, Jane will now have about $6 million total. So Jane goes to see the attorney, or see an attorney, about John's estate. When Jane eventually passes on in 2030, her estate is going to be worth about $12 million. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what happens in 3 different scenarios, and it's going to be a lot depending on the attorney, on what they look at and what they recommend, and what could happen with a good accountant. So going back into it.
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
Scenario 1, Jane meets with the real estate attorney Bruce, who closed on their house and drafted her and John's wills. Among other things, Bruce tells Jane that there's no need to file an estate tax return because the taxable limit is $12.92 million per person, and the one word is not mentioned. All right, so the estate level is at $6 million. It's $12.92 million is exempt from federal estate taxes. We're going to assume you're in a state that doesn't have its own estate tax level in this discussion, like North Carolina. So wait, it's actually less than half of what that limit is. You don't need to file an estate tax return, right? Well, yeah, you don't have to right now, but we're talking about planning ahead and what could end up being something very critical in saving money for when Jane passes on. And a lot of times people just look at estate planning and they don't actually go to an estate planning attorney. They're going to an attorney who does something else as their main line of business as an attorney. And, well, yeah, I can do a will. I've got some templates. I can put some stuff together, and I can draft some wills. No big deal. We'll make a couple extra dollars here. It happens all the time. And that's almost as bad as just someone trying to do it themselves and not really understanding it. There could be some pretty severe tax consequences, even though right now it looks like, well, okay, $12.92 million. Yeah, no need to file an estate tax return. So in this scenario, when Jane passes on in 2030, her estate is worth $12 million. And at that time, and this is just projected, the federal estate tax exemption would be, just guessing, $7.5 million. So there's a 40% tax rate on the excess. So Jane's family has to pay $1.8 million in estate taxes. Now, that's roughly looking at it at just that 40%. I know it's probably a little more complicated and looking through the rates and whatnot. But that's a lot of money to have to pay in estate taxes if it's not necessary. So let's look at another scenario. So Jane meets with the attorney Bill, who handled an auto accident lawsuit for the daughter Jennifer, and also set up a revocable living trust for her and John. So now this attorney, it seems like they know more than that first attorney Bruce, because they put them into a revocable living trust as a way to avoid probate. But this trust also contains some estate tax savings provisions in the form of a credit shelter trust that could be utilized. But let's take a look at what exactly the scenario is, and we'll describe what this would mean. So Bill reviews the estate for taxes, describes the credit shelter trust, and tells Jane that she can put up to $3 million into the trust to shelter it from future estate taxes. But the current limit is $12.92 million per person. Jane declines to use the credit shelter trust. Well, why? Why is that done? Well, it's because if you move that $3 million into the credit shelter trust, suddenly there are some restrictions. It's not a huge restriction on a surviving spouse. They can still be the trustee. They have to utilize things within parameters. They can get up to 5% or $5,000 each year, whichever is greater. They get all the income. If, say, it's a house that's in there, okay, they can live in the house. They don't have to pay rent, any of that other stuff. But it's kind of sectioned off, and now it's in a irrevocable portion of that trust. It needs its own taxpayer ID number, and it needs to file an estate tax return, even though all the income and gains can be put onto Jane's tax return. It's a hassle that she doesn't want to have to deal with. That's perfectly legitimate. That happens all the time. But the one word also wasn't mentioned. So why are we making a point of this $12.92 million for 2023? It's because those provisions are due to sunset. Back in, I believe it was 2017, basically Congress doubled the estate tax exemption. That's the permanent law. Yeah, we're going to double it. Problem is, they didn't have 60 votes in the Senate, so it has a mandatory 10-year sunset. So that doubling means, okay, the estate tax exemptions are going to be cut in half down the road. So by the time 2030 rolls around, Jane passes on, that doubling is long gone. So this is why it could end up being a tax scenario down the road. And again, the one word is not mentioned. So here we go. Same exact scenario when Jane passes on in 2030. It's $1.8 million in estate taxes that the family has to pay. All right, do we have a different scenario? Yeah, and it's the one word. Jane meets with the estate planning attorney Ben, who set up a revocable living trust for her and John. Ben reviews the estate for taxes, describes the credit shelter trust, tells Jane she can put up to $3 million, blah, blah, blah. Jane declines to use the credit shelter trust, but now Ben does something different. He recommends that Jane talk with an accountant and file an estate tax return anyway. Well, why do that? It's because of this one word that pops up, and the one word is portability. So this is, in legal terms, in estate law terms, it's a very recent term. And what it does is you can simply take the deceased spouse's unused estate tax credits and move it to the surviving spouse by making an election if you file an estate tax return for the first spouse that passed on. So even though there wouldn't be any taxes due, even if we're not going to put anything into a credit shelter trust, if you file that estate tax return, it's going to be a bit of an expense to have an accountant or a CPA do that. File it. All estate tax returns are personally reviewed by an IRS agent. There may be some questions. Yeah, but filing that under that portability provision means that Jane now takes all of John's estate tax credits and adds it to her own. So when Jane passes on, we have a very different scenario. Jane's estate is worth $12 million. John's estate tax portability that was moved to Jane meant Jane's estate pays nothing in estate taxes. So what we did here, using that last technique, even if we don't take advantage of the credit shelter trust provisions and a good revocable living trust, what we ended up doing is, through that portability, moving those credits over to Jane from John. By filing that estate tax return, we saved $1.8 million in estate taxes. That's the secret. That's the one word. Why wouldn't you take this small expense and time of doing this to potentially save millions of dollars later? So I hope you learned something really important on this. It's not something that a lot of people consider. It's something that certainly the estate planning attorneys that don't do it as a full-time part of what their practice is about, they may not realize this. And the other thing is, once they hear no estate tax return needs to be done, they just suddenly don't even inquire further with an accountant. When we're working with our clients, we run through, here are the different things we can use a credit shelter trust. Talk to an accountant who understands estate taxes, because that portability can mean everything down the road and save a lot of money for the family. All right, so I hope you found that information useful. As I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And by the way, help us out. Go ahead and click the like button, because that's free and it helps spread the word. Whatever you do, go out there and make it a great day.